With 2 months left to play and 5 teams squarely in the mix, the NL wildcard race will be a dogfight down the stretch. Do the New York Mets need Francisco Lindor to be an MVP to make it out on top? I'll break that down and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So the Mets lost their final game of their series against the Minnesota Twins. It was a chance to sweep the series, and that's a good Twins team. By winning, they moved to 11 games over 500. They're second in the AL Central, squarely in the AL wildcard race. And honestly, this game sort of felt like a good team who's got pride that it's just not going to go down easy and get swept. And Luis Severino did not pitch well, had a nightmare third inning where he gave up 5 runs, and that did end up being the end of the day for him. The Mets went to Tyler McGill after that because McGill heading right back down to Syracuse soon as Paul Blackburn is set to make his first start over the weekend when the Mets play in Anaheim against the Angels. So we watched 2 innings of McGill in relief where he gave up an additional run. Didn't look horrible, but didn't really wow you into thinking, oh, he's got to stay on the big league roster by any stretch. And I think the Mets, instead of trying to use him as a bullpen arm, are going to want to send him down and keep him stretched out just in case something happens. He's your 6th starter that you could always go to whenever you need to. So that was really the ball game, though. Severino had a bad start, and that was it. I mean, there's really not much else that we can say to break down this game. It was good to see Danny Young have a clean inning, Adam Ottavino have a clean inning. Phil Maton did give up a run, but it could have been a lot worse. So I thought he fought through that inning. And then Huascar Brazaban comes in for the 9th inning, and he had a really strong showing. He did walk a batter, but 2 strikeouts. We saw how he could elevate that fastball. Really good stuff there. Nasty changeup. So I liked what I saw for Brazaban. I think the Mets might have had a real find here. And you look right now at their bullpen and how many guys have an ERA sub-3. Brazaban might just be the 8th inning guy for this team. So it was a very sneaky addition by David Stearns at the deadline. I really like that one a lot. And as far as the roster moves that we were expecting today, as the Mets had to add some pitchers from this deadline, they were able to have Blackburn meet them out in Anaheim, which allowed them to have an extra roster spot for the day, which belonged to McGill. So that's going to be the swap for Friday. And then you saw Tyler Zuper, the one pitcher the Mets got back from the Rays, get optioned down to AAA. You also saw Matt Gage, who never made an appearance, go right back to AAA to make room for Brazaban. That was the roster prediction I had on yesterday's show. So that ends up being the case. The Mets sticking with Danny Young in the bullpen for now. As I talked about on yesterday's show, he's got only a couple more options left, and he has thrown the ball a lot better as of late. Gives you a second lefty in that bullpen. So I think for now, we're going to see this group for a little bit until the obvious roster churn makes you have to make another move, and then the Mets now have more options whenever they need them waiting in AAA. But today's show is not about the game on Wednesday or the series that lies ahead. It's about the stretch run because we have now turned the calendar to the month of August. There's 2 months left. And the New York Mets have been one of the best teams of baseball over the last 2 months. You can make the argument just based on record alone. They have been the best team in baseball. There's a team right next to them, though, that I want to spend a lot of time on today, and that is the Arizona Diamondbacks. Because I look at this wild card race, and all of a sudden, it's going to be a dogfight. I mean, there was a long portion of this season where we thought, all right, maybe a team's going to make the playoffs with 84 wins. That's not the case anymore. It feels like you might even have nothing but 90-win teams in the playoffs because there's a lot of teams that are playing really good. There's been some separation now. And while you still have technically, you go all the way down to the Cubs, a huge grouping of teams that are within 7 games of the wild card race, if you really boil it down, it feels like there's 6 teams competing for 3 spots. You have the Braves, you have the Padres, Right now, the Diamondbacks are a half a game up on the Mets after play on Wednesday. The Mets, the Cardinals, who are a game behind the Mets. The Pirates are 2 games back from the Mets. And then beyond that, there's the Giants, the Reds, and the Cubs, who are all under 500. So those 6 teams, Braves, Padres, Diamondbacks, Mets, Cardinals, Pirates, are all squarely in this race. And it's going to be tough to make it out of it as one of the 3 playoff teams. And I'll tell you what, it does make me feel a little bit better about what the Mets did at the deadline, because I think they got reinforcements to make that push, but they didn't hurt their future for a push that could go in either direction. In 2021, we saw the Mets make a big trade to get Javi Baez and Trevor Williams from the Cubs, and they traded Pete Crow Armstrong. Now, Pete Crow Armstrong has not had the best early success in the big leagues. He is an elite defensive center fielder. Who knows what his career is going to be, but that was a lot to give up at the time. And if you just think about Pete Crow Armstrong, had he been on the Mets in 2022, that could have been a piece that might have gotten you something better for a season where you were more clearly heading towards the playoffs. And so I think when you really think about what the Mets are up against, the deadline looks better and better. But just looking now at what that push is going to mean, there are certain sites that give you playoff odds, and Fangraphs is one of them. So I went to Fangraphs to see, all right, what's the Mets' odds to make the playoffs right now? The Braves are sitting at 84.7% chance to make the playoffs. They are favored in this race to get out of it. The Padres are at 70.3. So it seems like those 2 teams are the clear favorites to grab a wild card spot. And right now they are in those top 2 spots. The Mets are sitting at 46.4%. The Diamondbacks, 58.8%. Then you have the Cardinals at 26.7%, the Pirates at 14.6%. Now, why is that the case? Well, if you look at strength of schedule and you really see who's got the toughest road ahead, the Cardinals have the 5th highest strength of schedule remaining. So if you look at winning percentage of their remaining competition, 5th highest for the Cardinals at 518. Pirates are at 512. Diamondbacks at 510. The Mets, 23rd highest at 488. Braves, 485. Reason why the Padres are favorited to make the playoffs, they have the easiest schedule from here on out. Not to mention, they just made some big additions to bolster that bullpen. So they're going to be able to shorten games with a really good bullpen. They have a lineup that's hitting pretty well right now. They got Dylan Cease pitching near the Cy Young race. It makes sense why the Padres are supposed to come out of this. And the Braves are clearly a team that no one expects to fall out of this race and miss the playoffs. So you really look at it from that lens, it does feel like Mets, Diamondbacks, Cardinals, and then the Pirates are still hanging out, but I just can't imagine them actually holding serve throughout the rest of this season. They do have Paul Skeens. They did make some additions to help their lineup, Brian De La Cruz, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, but I think they still have the weakest lineup in this race, and ultimately I think that's going to be what dooms them. The Cardinals, I think they got a shot at it, and we're going to talk about them in the next segment, but to me, this is really going to boil down to Mets versus Diamondbacks, and that could also add a wrinkle into the MVP race. So what we're going to talk about next here is those top 3 teams that we're mentioning as far as that final wild card spot. The Mets, the Cardinals, and the Diamondbacks. What's on their roster? How are they going to make this push? And then we'll close the show on some MVP stuff. Before we get to any of it, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Liquid IV. During these summer months, when you're taking in America's pastime, don't forget to hydrate with Liquid IV's Popsicle Firecracker flavor, which is a surefire summer hit. You want to get hydrated with electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients from the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. What I love about Liquid IV is both the convenience and how it makes me feel. It's so easy to just tear a packet, pour it in, and you're enjoying a great, refreshing beverage. And personally, I like to go on runs, and I'm living in South Florida. It's hot over the summer. I got to wait until about an hour before the sun is going to go down to just get out there and get my jog in. And I sweat a ton. So I come in, I need to hydrate. And instead of having to drink 2-3 glasses of water, just 1 packet of Liquid IV. It tastes amazing. I love the strawberry lemonade flavor myself, but I will say I have tried that Popsicle Firecracker, which is a blend of lemon, lime, cherry, and raspberry. it is very good as well. I like strawberry lemonade more, but if I want a little bit of variety, I definitely go to that popsicle firecracker, and it makes me feel so much better because it's powered by Live Hydro Science. So this is an optimized ratio of electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients that turn ordinary water into extraordinary hydration, 3 times the electrolytes of leading sports drinks, 8 essential vitamins and nutrients, always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. No more thirsty summers when you indulge in hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code MLB at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MLB at liquidiv.com. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports by checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. As I said in the last segment, I believe this wildcard race is ultimately going to come down to the Diamondbacks and the Mets fighting it out for that final spot. But we have to give the Cardinals credit. They're right in this race, and they did make a big trade at the deadline. They add Eric Fetty to their rotation and Tommy Pham to their lineup. There's something about seeing a guy go back to where their career started. Tommy Pham in a Cardinals jersey just looks right. He had his best season of his career in a Cardinals uniform. He comes over, hits a grand slam in his first game. Second game, he went like 3 from 4, 2 or 3 RBIs. Another great performance by him, and that could inject some life into that lineup. But I still believe the Cardinals are the clear third team among this race. And the reason I believe that is they have yet to have that incredible month. They're in this race because they have been 500 or slightly better each month of the season. Now, you could say, hey, they're due to go off, and maybe that's the case, and they do have the best franchise track record among these 3 teams. But I look at their roster. They got Sonny Gray in the rotation, maybe the best pitcher of these 3 teams. Miles Mikolas, Kyle Gibson, now Eric Fetty. Lance Lynn's on the IL. When he comes back, he'd be the 5th starter. Right now, Andre Palante. It's maybe the best rotation, but not convincingly. How much better is that than what the Mets have with Severino, Manaea, Quintana, Peterson, and now Blackburn? I don't think it's significantly better. The Diamondbacks right now, you got Zach Gallen, you got Brandon Pfaadt, Jordan Montgomery, who started to throw the ball a little bit better, Ryan Nelson, and they don't really have a 5th start at the moment. They've been getting by with some bullpen games. Merrill Kelly and Eduardo Rodriguez are both on the mend. So they get one of those guys back, maybe 2. That's going to help them a lot. The thing for me, though, is you look at the components of these teams. The Mets and the Diamondbacks have created great separation with their lineup, particularly since June 1st. The Cardinals, since that time, are middle of the pack. They're 14th in runs scored, 14th in home runs, 14th in WRC+. WRC+ being weighted runs created plus, an all-encompassing offensive metric that measures hitters or teams, in this case, by a league average of 100. So you look at the Cardinals, just slightly better than league average. Now you look at the Diamondbacks and the Mets. The Diamondbacks lead Major League Baseball in runs scored since June 1st. They're 8th in home runs. They're 3rd in WRC+ at 125, I believe. The Mets are 2nd in runs scored across all of Major League Baseball, 2nd in home runs, and then they're 1st in WRC+ at 131. This does not take into account Wednesday's game. Regardless, though, the Mets have had the best lineup in baseball since June 1st. The Diamondbacks have not been that far behind. I think these 2 teams have been the hottest in the National League lately, and I don't see any reason why that would stop. I look at the Diamondbacks, and I think they're getting stronger and stronger, and that makes me a little bit nervous. The Cardinals are just fundamentally sound. They don't have any clear weaknesses, but I look at the best player on the Cardinals, and I'm really coming up empty on who exactly that is. Wilson Contreras is having by far their best offensive season. He did miss a big chunk of that when JD Martinez hit him in the wrist on that swing and knocked him out for a little bit. Alec Burleson's having a solid season, but there's not a lot of guys in that lineup in St. Louis that are having standout years. Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado on the other end of the spectrum are really battling with Father Time. They're not having good seasons. Nolan Arenado has been a league average hitter. Paul Goldschmidt has been worse than league average. They're sitting at 11 home runs for Arenado, 16 for Goldschmidt. That's not great. They have gotten some power production from Burleson, as I mentioned. He's got the 120 WRC+. He's got 18 home runs, 61 runs driven in. Nolan Gorman's got 19 home runs. Mason Wynn's batting 280, giving them a great defensive shortstop. But they don't have guys that are having really standout offensive seasons. The Diamondbacks, Ketel Marte, who we're going to talk about more in the next segment, has been on an absolute tear this season. Christian Walker has been really, really good. They're starting to get more from Gabby Moreno. Jock Peterson has been a great find for them as a left-handed part of a DH platoon. So he's been really solid. All of a sudden, Eugenio Suarez is on a tear. He's got 16 home runs on the season. 10 of them came in the month of July. So that's a really big piece for them. Corbin Carroll starting to figure it out piece by piece. I don't know if they're going to get the MVP version of Corbin Carroll for a couple of months, but can they get an above average hitter? You would think that that's, of course, still in there, and he's starting to swing it a little bit better. So I just look at that lineup, and there's a lot of dangerous hitters in it. And then you look at the Mets lineup, and again, a ton of dangerous hitters. When you look at individual seasons, guys with WRC pluses of 120 or better, the Mets trounce both of these teams. So they have way more above average hitters, from Lindor to Nimmo to Vientos, who we're going to have to spend a whole show on at some point soon here, because what he's doing is just spectacular. 62 games, 15 home runs, 40 RBIs. You guys remember 3 years ago where I told you that Mark Vientos had 40 home run potential? And I was banging the desk saying, why isn't Vientos getting MLB experience? And why are you wasting at bats on JD Davis? Well, now all of a sudden Vientos not only is doing it with the bat, the glove has been way better, made some nice plays in the field today. But Vientos has been, I mean, you can make an argument their best offensive player. He's been that good lately. You have Alvarez and Alonso both over 120 when it comes to WRC plays plus. Iglesias over 150. JD Martinez over 120. Luis Torrens over 140. Now you add in Jesse Winker, who's had a great offensive season. I think the Mets have the best lineup in this wildcard race, which should bode well for them. The problem, I think they might have the worst pitching of these three teams. Now, hopefully, the additions the Mets made to their bullpen can help solidify things. And maybe Paul Blackburn's going to be a nice find to hold down the back end of that rotation. Maybe you get Christian Scott back at some point. Who knows? But I think if the Mets are going to make this run, it's going to require two more standout months from their offense. And it's going to require Francisco Lindor playing at an MVP level. So where we're going to close the show today is talking about the MVP race, because I think Lindor is one of 5 names that is in this race, and Ketel Marte of the Diamondbacks is another one. So I want to talk about those two guys and how a narrative can form for either of them if they lead their team to the playoffs for them to be a shocking MVP. So we're going to go through that to close the show. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. If you have not caught a Mets game this season, what are you doing? Get out to the ballpark. They're on the road right now, but when they come home, make sure you get your tickets and get them through Game Time. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase, and they're the place to go for last-minute tickets. I don't even purchase my tickets until I'm basically walking into the stadium. I pull open the Game Time app. I look at all the different seats. You can view the view from your seat before you purchase. You get all-in pricing up front, so you're not surprised when you go to check out the hidden fees jump out at you. You know what you're going to pay for those seats, and you can be all set, checked out in 2 taps, and have your tickets within a minute. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. So download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks from the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You get the lineup graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup before the Mets play without ever having to go on social media. Make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider by finding the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Let's talk the NL MVP race, because it is very close as we enter play in August. 2 months left, and you have no idea who's going to be the MVP. In the American League, it's another tight race. You got Aaron Judge, you got Gunnar Henderson, Bobby Witt, but everyone sort of thinks if Aaron Judge stays healthy, keeps producing, he's going to be the guy. The National League is way more wide open because the guy with the best offensive stats is Shohei Ohtani. He leads in WAR, home runs, RBIs. He's got 28 stolen bases, 32 home runs, 76 RBIs. He's been unbelievable, but he's a DH, and he would be the first DH only to win the MVP. That's something that it would not surprise us at all if Ohtani was the first to do something because he's always first. But if you are really looking at an MVP narrative, and you have to think about the Dodgers, who have gone through a million injuries this year and have so much talent. Granted, Ohtani's a big part of that. But they have never been at risk of not making the playoffs. They have never felt it. They're a team that just cruises through the season. Their guys put up big numbers. They have a bunch of all-stars. And then come October, we find out who they really are. That's the Dodgers. And if I'm a voter, I have some fatigue on Ohtani always being there. I have some fatigue on the Dodgers always being there. And I have some fatigue on the idea, not even some fatigue, but I have some real apprehension towards voting a DH only as the MVP unless the statistical case is just overwhelming. And it could get there for Ohtani, but it's not there yet. Number 2 in wins above replacement in the National League, according to Fangraphs right now, is Elly De La Cruz. Now, his argument is gaudy stats because he's got 55 stolen bases, 18 home runs. He could end the year with 30 and 75, maybe even pushes towards 30 and 80. And that would be a spectacular season. But doesn't have a lot of RBIs. Now, that's a team stat, but this is most valuable player. Doesn't team performance matter to some degree? And the Reds are a team that has fallen out of this wild card race. It's not his fault, but he has not been the most valuable player, guiding his team, lifting them up, pushing them into contention. Whereas the other two guys we're going to talk about, Lindor and Marte, have been. So all three of them are bunched up when it comes to WAR. I think that Elly De La Cruz would have to hit some ridiculous benchmark statistically, and the other two would have to fall off, as would Ohtani, for Elly to end up being the MVP. The fifth guy is Bryce Harper, and that's best player, best team. Voters could go that way, but he already has won his MVPs, and he is pretty far behind in wins above replacement at 3.8 compared to the other guys that are up at 5 wins. So he's about a win behind with a couple months to play. He can make that up if he gets hot, and I would not count out Bryce Harper. If I was a betting man and I was looking at the odds and I'm not sure what they are, I might tell you to bet on Harper just because he is a safer pick to have 2 great months to close the season. And then you might be looking at a 110-win Phillies team and say, oh, well, Bryce Harper was the best player on that team. He's the most valuable. I think there is a world, though, where this could come down to Lindor and Marte, or really one of them. Whichever one drives their team into the playoffs might just be a very shocking but deserving MVP candidate. So here's the case for both of them, particularly lately. Since June 1st, they have been the best 2 players in the National League. Lindor, 3.4 F4. He has led all players in the National League in wins above replacement since June 1st. Marte, not far behind at 3.2. Ketel Marte is hitting 351 since then, 433 on base, 637 slug, a 191 WRC plus, which is identical to Shohei Ohtani. Lindor's offensive numbers, not quite as overwhelming. 282 average, 371 on base, 545 slug, 160 WRC plus with Gold Glove defense, which gets that WAR number up. He's got 13 home runs, 14 stolen bases, 38 runs scored, and 34 RBIs since June 1st. Marte, 14 home runs, 37 runs scored, 43 RBIs, 5 stolen bases. Lindor's at 22 and 22 on the season when it comes to stolen bases and home runs. He's going to get to 30-30 again. He might even push for 35-35. There's a chance of that. I look at where the Mets are, where the Diamondbacks are, where this MVP race is. And I'm not saying the Mets need Lindor to win the MVP to make the playoffs, but they need him to finish in the top 3. And one of those names might be Ohtani. The other one might be Elly. It could be Bryce Harper. But Francisco Lindor has to be better than Ketel Marte down the stretch. And the Mets as a team obviously have to be better. And it's not all on Lindor's shoulders. But I do want to acknowledge What an incredible season it has been for Francisco Lindor. And man, if I could be on the podium for him, advocating a case, and I'll do that now. I really think that this guy has done everything this year to really be the embodiment of what a most valuable player is. There's no question who the best player in the Mets is this season. It's Francisco Lindor. And if you look at everything he has done for this team, and it goes beyond just the offensive numbers, although his move to the leadoff spot has been the catalyst that started everything. Francisco Lindor, when that whole players only meeting happened, and I've said this before on this show, so for those of you who heard me, on this diatribe in the past, bear with me. But I talk about it a lot. Lindor holds the players only meeting after Jorge Lopez launches that glove into the stands. Wants the team to be accountable. Watch last year as the Mets saw a season slip away and doesn't want it to happen again. Wants to nip it in the bud a month earlier than last year, where it was a June swoon that killed them. This was a horrible May, and they had to get things right. And in 2 months, this team transformed, and it was under Lindor's leadership. He holds that players only meeting to get everyone to be accountable, and there's just been a better process in place ever since then. He gets in front of the media, answers all the tough questions, an 11-minute media session, talking about why he held the meeting, what it was about, what the Mets had to do. And we have since seen all of that realized. Also, the game after that meeting, he himself wins a baseball game. Has the game-winning RBI, if I'm not mistaken, or he scores the game-winning run. Had a home run early. I don't have the exact stats in front of me, but I'll tell you, you go back, you watch the highlights of that game. It was Lindor himself that got the Mets to that first victory after the meeting. Against the Diamondbacks, funny enough. Mets and Diamondbacks split that 4-game series. They got another series coming up at the end of this month, which is going to be very critical for what happens in this playoff race. Lindor has been doing it with the glove, doing it with the bat, and doing it with his leadership. You see Mark Vientos and what he's done defensively, and he's talked about it. What's been the big change? It says, it's not that he wasn't trying, but he said in the past, there was just a lack of focus. And he said his pre-pitch has gotten a lot better, and he credits Lindor for helping him focus, for sort of, getting that in his brain, that he needs to be just a little more locked in. And you're seeing that, really play out because Mark Vientos, he's not fleet of foot. We saw that as he tried to catch a pop-up today, or he did catch the second one with a sliding grab. That was really nice, but we saw he a little bit cement-footed there. You think Pete Alonso beats Mark Vientos in a race? Random side thought, but I actually don't know. I think running like first to third, I would probably take Pete. Regardless, Mark Vientos, he has a great arm. So he has a tool that should play at third base, and it has. And we're all of a sudden seeing some pretty soft hands. It was just cutting out those mental mistakes. And I'm not giving Lindor all of the credit for Mark Vientos' success this year, because that's primarily just Vientos. But his defensive success in particular, I'm going to give Lindor a good piece of that. And just the leadership that has been felt with the guy standing to his right day in, day out in the infield, and just the rest of the team. So leadership being a huge component in Lindor's MVP case, that's where the Mets standing at the end of the season is going to really drive the narrative on him. But if the New York Mets find themselves as the final wildcard team, or even better, maybe they exceed expectations, maybe they finish ahead of the Padres or ahead of the Braves, they're right there against all those teams right now. And Francisco Lindor finishes with 35 and 35, and he drives in 100, and he's got a 7.5 win season when it's all said and done. That could be right atop the league or atop the league outside of Ohtani potentially. I really do believe we could see this as the one season where Francisco Lindor could win an MVP or bare minimum finish in the top 3. And he's going to be the guy that, in my mind, decides this season for the Mets. If Francisco Lindor tails off, and look, he'd still have a great season even if he did, I don't think the Mets are going to find themselves in a playoff spot. But he's the one guy that could have a monster final 2 months that can put the Mets in a playoff position and put him squarely in that MVP race. It's going to be fun to watch it all play out, and I'll be here with you every step of the way with your daily show on the New York Mets. I appreciate all of you who tuned in. Off day on Thursday, so I'm going to do some prospect stuff on tomorrow's show. Not quite sure what that's going to be yet. Might be an updated top 10 of the top prospects in the Mets system. Also, David Stearns today in a podcast talked about still having some help that could be on the way in Syracuse this year. So we'll touch on that as well. Make sure, again, you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast so you don't miss it. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. The goal is to get to 10,000 subs by the end of the season. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets if you want to be a Locked On Mets insider. Find a link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers absolutely everything in the world of sports. Talk about Locked On Sports Today with your local experts from each team, your league-wide experts from each league. Locked On Sports Today is streaming 24/7 on YouTube and on Amazon Fire TV.